I'm going to start with Chelsea and sort of ask a bit about the origin story of She Persisted and then the She Persisted chapter book series. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, Jill, thank you. And of course, thank you to RJ Julia for convening us in kind of virtual space, but what always very much feels like such kind of deep, sincere community. I hope everyone is having, as much as possible, healthy and happy starts to this new year and still these ongoing COVID times that we're all living through together. So you have to say it's such a profound, honor to be sharing this space with Kelly and to have the chance to kind of have her really talk about the just extraordinary Coretta Scott King, who is an important part of the kind of catalyst for the first She Persisted picture book. I know it probably now feels like an eon ago, and for maybe some of the kind of youngest members of our audience, it may be half your lifetime ago, but way back in like early 2017, there was this moment in the U.S. Senate chamber when Senator Elizabeth Warren of Massachusetts was attempting to read a letter that the great Coretta Scott King had written kind of into the record as concerned, as nomination kind of to be kind of then President Trump's first attorney general. And she was censured, which is just kind of a fancy way of saying that her largely male, entirely Republican colleagues said, they didn't want to hear from her and they didn't think they needed to hear the words of the extraordinary civil rights leader, Coretta Scott King. And thankfully, Senator Warren kind of left the Senate chamber and immediately read the full letter kind of on Facebook Live and ensured that while it may not be in the Senate record, it was still at least very much kind of in the public record. And the Senate Majority Leader, dismissed her and said, like we kept telling her to be quiet. Basically she made us like censor her. Like it was her kind of ongoing efforts and like, she just wouldn't be quiet. She wouldn't be quiet. Nevertheless, she persisted. And it just felt like such a moment that I think so many women kind of have encountered at various points kind of in our lives when we're told to kind of be quiet, to stand in the back, to know our place. And that kind of happened to someone who, has such a place of prominence and power, who was channeling kind of one of the great civil rights leaders, in American history, just was so painful to see. And I remember thinking at the time I had, a daughter who was, not even 2.5, and I had a son who was barely 6 months old. And I just was thinking about all the times that, first American women and then women around the world have really had to persist to help make our country, our society safer and more just and more equitable, more righteous, healthier, more sustainable. And just had all of these stories that kind of meant so much to me that I knew I wanted to share with my children. And I think Jill had a similar reaction. And so we were talking and decided, we wanted to kind of, for the youngest readers, share some of the stories that, yes, have meant, a great deal to me, but also I think have been a great deal to so many. And then, while kind of I've had the great privilege of continuing to share these stories in events like this and kind of, back in the times when we could have, events in person when it was safe to do so, I just was so struck by how many young readers and their parents, their grandparents, teachers, librarians, but especially young readers wanted to know more about Helen Keller or now about Coretta Scott King. And I'm just so thankful that Jill and the team at Philomel and Penguin Young Readers were supportive of kind of further fleshing out these remarkable women's stories so that for the children, and I think they're not just a few, I think they're many who want to know more about kind of how these women persisted to make such a positive difference, for the work they cared about and the work they were engaged in, but really for our country. I'm just so thankful that these books are now out in the world and that I got to play just a really, really small part in helping make that happen.
These books are so fantastic. The ones about Helen Keller and Coretta Scott King, for sure. And I also recently heard from a friend of mine whose daughter She Persisted Florence Griffith Joyner for Christmas and has since then been doing 15-minute sprints in her backyard and asking her mom to time her. So, I mean, one of my favorite parts of these books is all of the ways that young readers can persist and honor the women that these books are about.
Well, so Jill, so my daughter has been reading She Persisted in Sports again to prepare for the Winter Olympics. So she's like going to be ready. I don't quite know how. So I'm not quite sure how it's helping her prepare.
It's her research, so she knows,
But she read it once on Saturday and once on Sunday yesterday.
So cute.
Yeah, so it's helping her prepare.
So Kelly, I want to switch over to you now and ask what drew you to Coretta Scott King's story, and what was it that made you want to write the She Persisted biography about her?
Yeah, thank you. And I want to say thank you to Chelsea for coming up with this, just beautiful, beautiful tribute to women who deserve to be celebrated and to have their stories known. And thank you, Jill and Talia, for guiding the story to publication. But when I think about Coretta Scott King, I think about kids in class that learn every year about Dr. King, that get to hear the I Have a Dream speech, that do projects about Dr. King, that we have a National Day of Service in his honor. And how many know about Coretta Scott King, who was a visionary and a humanitarian and a freedom fighter and a gifted singer, who was his intellectual, spiritual, and activist partner in every way. And so I think it's so important for kids to be able to think about the civil rights movement and not just have images of men flash through their mind. And there were, incredible men that made a difference, but there were women who were right there with them, side by side, every step of the way. So I love that She Persisted is about giving these women their flowers, which is why I particularly love the cover of this book with the flowers on it. Coretta Scott King, to me, is, such a champion who deserves the same kind of recognition that Dr. King does, but, sadly just hasn't been celebrated in the same way. So this is a chance to give her due.
Did you learn anything that you didn't already know in the researching of this book?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it was so cool to get a chance to really do a deep dive into her life. And one of the things that sticks out the most to me was that she created this series of freedom concerts. She did more than 20. It raised more than $50,000, where she married songs of the movement, Negro spirituals, with storytelling. And it really touched people. It moved them in ways that they hadn't been. When I was doing my research, I looked and saw, rave reviews from different magazines, and how much what she was doing really made a difference. So it wasn't just about her idea of everyone needed to be equal and create change, but she was a leader in her own right, using her God-given gifts to bring people together, to bring a tension to the movement, to make sure people felt the spirit of the movement through her voice and through those stories. So I feel like it was kind of a poem and a diary and a classical performance all wrapped into one. And I think that's so beautiful. And I think that also teaches kids that you can use who you are to create a difference. You don't have to reach outside of yourself. All of us are given these, wonderful gifts that we can use to make the world better. And she's such a beautiful model of that.
Absolutely. I thought her musicality and all of that, I didn't know either until I read your book. And I thought it was such a really powerful way that she was contributing to the movement then. So I was so glad to learn more about her in your book.
Oh, thank you.
And Courtney, what drew you to Helen Keller's story? What made you want to tell it?
Well, I had long admired Helen Keller since I was really, really young. When I was very little, we lived in California, and the school that I went to, which was just the public school up the block from our house, had an attachment to the school that was a school for kids who were deaf and blind. And I was in I was there from first through third grade. And I actually don't think that school opened until I was in second or third grade. But I remember at a certain point, there were students there who were my age, who were living with deafness or blindness. And at one point they had, our third grade class was able to learn sign language if we chose that elective. And then around that same time, we were assigned a biography project. And because I had been, really moved by what was happening just steps away from my classroom door, I did my third grade biography project on Helen Keller. So I was really thrilled to be able to write about her in my 40s. I wish I had the version I wrote at 8 years old. It is lost in so many cross-country moves at this point, but I do remember really being so inspired by her story at that point. I think when you're 8, you don't really realize like what hardship is in the same way, but I knew that she had to, whatever struggles I was having in third grade, I knew that she had tried harder, and it was incredibly moving and inspiring to me to read her story and to know what these other children that I was seeing every day were doing and conquering and persisting in their own right. I was also, aware that they were getting this, that there was, I wonder what it would be like now. If I don't think that school still exists, even my elementary school, but I think there'd probably be more integration. They were very separate from us at the time. If we wanted to be like, to do work with those kids, it was, you walked like down the block and like went to that attached school. And I think it would be different now. But I knew that they were getting the same lessons I was getting, and then extra sign language and speech therapy for some kids. And kids were reading in Braille, and it was absolutely, it's very it's an experience I won't ever forget at that age. So Helen Keller has long been someone that I've known about. And then I watched The Miracle Worker when I was young and rewatched it recently. I also, what I love about her especially is she was somebody that had things she wanted to do in her life that nobody had done before. She wanted to go to college. She was deaf and blind and wanted to go to college. And she didn't want to just go to any college. She actually wanted to go to Harvard. Harvard didn't admit women, so she went to Radcliffe. But I think the lesson of her life for me too is, if there's something that you want to accomplish and you want to try, just because nobody else has ever done it doesn't mean that you cannot. And that kind of persistence is extraordinary to me.